Welcome to DeProgram. I'm Michelle Witte. I'm here with Ted Rall and John Kiriakou. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good to see you.
It's very cold.
It's very
cold.
It's pretty cold. It's staying icy. I have discovered actually that I really like going out in crappy conditions, like going out and hiking and stuff, because there's nobody out and it's really quiet and the animals aren't expecting anybody. So I went out with my dog this morning. It was very fun. But I'm like stepping very carefully because I don't like falling down and there is a lot of ice, but I just let my dog loose to run. And then I'm watching her thinking, well, I hope she figures out ice because I don't need a big vet bill right now. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why.
I've never heard of a quadruped falling and breaking their leg.
No.
I mean, I've seen her slide is what I will say. And she is a bit of a lemon, so I wouldn't put it past her.
Well, she sure looked like she was enjoying the snow on the video you posted on Facebook.
She's having a very good time. But we're not really going to talk about the East Coast weather. We are going to talk a little bit about the fires in California in a bit, but we have a bunch of interesting media stories, including a Washington Post cartoonist quitting over, I guess, a single instance of a cartoon not being accepted, but maybe she has a point. We got Blake Lively versus James Baldoni, which is, I mean, stupid in that it involves, so already very rich people who will probably suffer no consequences anyway, but is a really interesting look into how Hollywood works, how like the sort of Hollywood publicist industry functions. And yeah, I have a theory about this, that just when it went to the New York Times, that was kind of a bridge too far. And that's why this has all gone down, because the same shit happens in Page Six and the Daily Mail constantly.
All the time. So
yeah, I think that's interesting. And then we've got CNN versus, I don't know, a guy who maybe is a scumbag, but they probably did him dirty anyway. So we'll talk about that. And of course we have the drama involving the sale or not of U.S. Steel, which Joe Biden did block and is now getting sued over by both parties to the deal, who are saying that they want it and that they need it. Oh, and we also had, this is just a fun little tidbit, Joe Biden in an interview yesterday. I first saw this in the Kenosha Times, but I forget who exactly he was talking to. When he was asked, he was asked, would you still be in good enough shape to be president had you won? And he said, so far so good, but who knows what I'm going to be when I'm 86. Well, buddy, you were telling us, I mean, you were campaigning for another 4-year contract job, and you kept insisting, and your friends in the media kept insisting that you were totally fine. And it was ageist and also racist to ask if, whether you would still be vigorous and competent and literally even alive enough to do it. You said that was, those were inexcusable questions. And now you yourself are saying, I'm great at being president now, which I think the three of us would all take issue with. But yeah.
The vote, not to mention the voters.
Yes, exactly. Clearly. Yeah, but who could say whether I'll be this spry and quick-witted and vigorous at 85 as I am on the campaign trail and on the debate stage today. Just sort of rubbing our faces in it, honestly.
Yeah, that's what it was.
I mean, I didn't take it that way. I just thought this is a man in total denial about he does not understand what just happened here, right? That's what everyone was worried about. I mean, Everyone was already saying, we haven't seen hide nor hair of you in 4 years. And now you want to re-up. And we don't even know that you can do the job now. And you want 4 more years. Where are you going to be at 86? That was the issue. That was the number one issue, more than inflation, more than the border. people were concerned about his age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
we can't
concerned
forget
about
that. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. We can't forget that debate performance against Donald Trump, where he was just lost. And this was after the campaign had leaked stories that he had been practicing and prepping for weeks in advance, and he was just a confused, doddering old man, to the point where even Trump was taken aback by it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it wasn't just Biden himself. It was people recognizing, because the biggest thing that I thought about that debate, which I watched like a couple of hours later because I was on vacation, and I watched it and thought, yeah, this is bad. But I had seen the Twitter reaction before I watched the debate, and I honestly was expecting something worse, because you had seen Biden doing essentially that, giving essentially that terrible performance in front of podiums for the last year or so. And
Michelle,
so I
right.
think people
But
were also
it was the first time people paid attention.
That's but also they're like, it's not just Biden, it's everyone around him, everyone in his party, and all of these friendly media outlets have all been telling us that he's fine. And so it's not just that I'm concerned about the president. I don't know who I can trust in this entire party and in this entire milieu.
Wait, you don't trust Kamala Harris when she said she had trouble keeping up with him,
right? No,
and Karine Jean-Pierre, like, oh my God, he's like a whirly dervish. Who can catch him as he races through the White House from point A to point B?
He must have been rolling down a hill.
Well, I mean, but this is interesting because it does show that I count myself in that too. That those of us in the political class don't have a very strong awareness of the fact that there are certain key events like the first presidential debate, especially when there's not going to be very many of them, where that people really pay attention to, and they really tune out politics the rest of the time. I feel like that debate really crystallized that, because Michelle, you're right. Everything, I mean, that behavior was not new or surprising to those of us who do pay attention to this all the time.
Yeah. Can I say one thing about people tuning out? We are going to talk a little bit, we're going to talk in a little bit about this interesting report by the Quincy Institute about think tank funding. But one of the things that they go through, they talk about, think tanks, they lack transparency, they're funded by Pentagon contractors, blah, blah, blah. But there's some little tidbit about how people think about or feel about think tanks. And there's like a data point that's something like, I don't know, only 20% of the American population trusts think tanks. And I just thought, buddy, I'm shocked that most regular people have any opinion about think tanks at all. I'm astonished. They must have found just
or that they even know what they
are aware of a think tank. Yeah. And then you said, you trust them? And you're like, I don't know. Are they in Washington? I guess not.
Yeah, that's
what laugh.
Yeah.
All right. What do we want? You want to talk about U.S. Steel, or you want to talk about the snowballing defamation stories? Let's go to U.S. Steel.
Yeah, let's talk about U.S. Steel. For months we've been seeing reports that Nippon Steel, the biggest steel maker in Japan, was making an attempt to purchase U.S. Steel. U.S. Steel has been based in Pittsburgh for about 120 years. For generations, it was the largest steel producer in the world. It no longer is, but it produces very high quality steel. And forgive me if this is a little bit too far down in the weeds, but it's one of the world's only producers of something called seamless steel. They'll make seamless tube, where Japanese tubes have rivets in them. U.S. Steel produces tubes that have no seams and have no rivets, and so they last longer. They're of higher quality, and they're more expensive. So Nippon Steel made an attempt to purchase U.S. Steel. At first, when the story first broke, and we talked about this on our old show, the scandal was that the Pittsburgh headquarters, which, as I said, had been there for 120 years, would move to Cleveland, which was unacceptable if you're a Pittsburgher. That's really not what's important. What's important was the danger, if you're a member of the United Steelworkers Union, was that the place would eventually shut down, that it would prove to be unprofitable, and the cost differential between seamed tube and seamless tube just wasn't worth it for the Japanese, and they would shut down elements of U.S. Steel and put American steelworkers out of business. That turned out to be sort of overtaken by events. And we saw this really serious split between executives and employees of U.S. Steel and members of the United Steelworkers Union. U.S. Steel maintained that this was a really great development because Nippon Steel had promised to spend more than $3 billion to upgrade Pittsburgh area steel mills, which, believe me, are in dire need of upgrades. But the United Steelworkers Union said, no, we just don't trust Nippon Steel to not put us all out of business, move the headquarters to Cleveland, and then shut down these plants in Allegheny County, Butler County, Beaver County, and Lawrence County, Pennsylvania. So we were at this standstill. And then a few days ago, Joe Biden declared that the sale should not go forward in the interest of national security. Now, there's a precedent for this. We were talking offline a few minutes ago that John Kennedy did this. Richard Nixon did it. There's ample precedent for a president of the United States to declare the steel industry a national security necessity. And that's what Joe Biden did. So he blocked the sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon Steel. Interestingly enough, yesterday, MSNBC, of all organizations, came out and said, Joe Biden is wrong. This would be good for American labor. We should let the Japanese buy U.S. Steel. Well, Joe Biden, as it turns out, is in lockstep with Donald Trump on this issue. Mm-hmm. And so Nippon Steel said this morning that they understand that Donald Trump's position is the same as Joe Biden's, but they believe that Donald Trump can be convinced to allow the sale to go forward. So U.S. Steel is suing the Biden administration. Nippon Steel is suing the Biden administration. And Nippon Steel is also approaching the Trump campaign to ask him to change his mind. It's not over, but it's almost over.
Yeah, I mean, I think the timing was really the most unfortunate aspect of this whole mess. The merger was announced, or the acquisition, more accurately, was announced in late 2023. In other words, right at the beginning of a national presidential election.
That's right.
In which economic nationalism was front and center as an issue, as it almost always is. But whenever Donald Trump is involved, it's definitely there. Joe Biden is from Scranton, Pennsylvania. So he has the union roots and he's had the union support all that time. And, it's almost like the Japanese didn't anticipate. And full disclosure, I used to work for the Industrial Bank of Japan Trust Company as a loan officer. And during the 80s, when the Japanese steel industry, not just Nippon, but other companies as well, were dumping cheap Japanese steel on the US market that they were losing money on just in order to get more market share, drive American steel companies under this, get more market share, and it was very controversial. It was very well known. Americans from that period all remember this. They knew about it. And so it seemed like Nippon Steel is kind of like saying, well, we won, we get our way. Yeah. And now we want to wear the steel crown, not just in Japan, but also in the United States. So there's resentments there, lingering resentments from older Americans who remember this. It's kind of like, no, if we do this for you, I mean, I think as a former finance person, I look at this merger and I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm on team MSNBC here. Mm-hmm. I'm like, there's a lot of synergies here. The Americans do need the investment. I don't think, from previous precedent, you never know what's going to happen, that the Japanese are likely to just do mass layoffs and they are going to view the American steelworkers as a resource more than American companies tend to do in an acquisition. So probably mass layoffs are probably not even necessary. Probably the steelworkers could have gotten negotiated to have a couple extra seats on the board. That's a very Japanese thing to do. Mm-hmm. So they could have, to mitigate that risk, to be partners and be involved. And so but it was a timing thing. Politically, it was tone deaf and dumb. They should have just done it earlier or waited. And here we are. And I don't think the either Nippon or U.S. Steel's lawsuits have a chance in hell of getting anywhere.
Why do
right.
it? If you're Joe Biden, like why the timing is weird. What do you make of it? Like, do you really think it is because it's Scranton Joe? Is it the Democratic Party not wanting to let Trump take credit for something, like, you know what I mean, for attempting to protect American industry or whatever? Like, it's perplexing. It's
because nobody who remembers the dumping period is okay.
Yes.
is going to let it go, whether they're Democrat, Republican, or anything else. Nobody likes it. So it's like, it's not a Democrat thing. It's like, it's an American thing. It's literally like impinging on national pride. You know, I mean, you could have a Brooklyn hipster sitting at a bar next to a MAGA steelworker in Bethlehem, and they're both going to totally agree, like, fuck them. No, we're not letting that happen.
Yeah.
It feels more personal than a lot of this stuff usually is. I don't know. I think that's fascinating.
I think there's certain things that, like, are, where the United States looks back and thinks, can say credibly, usually we're the ones who screw over other countries. But here's one where we got screwed.
We did get screwed.
And it's kind of like, and there's resentments that have festered all these years.
I've said in the past that I remember the day that was the beginning of the end of the steel industry in Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio. I was in 7th grade, and the Youngstown Sheet and Tube closed, and kids were crying in the hallway in junior high school because their dads had been thrown out of work.
Ugh.
The Sheet and Tube was the largest employer in the area, and it never reopened. Half of those kids, their parents moved to the Sun Belt in search of work, and Northeastern Ohio and Western Pennsylvania never recovered economically. Never.
That's true.
And that was all blamed on the Japanese because they were dumping steel. They were selling it in the U.S. at prices that were lower than what it cost them to manufacture. They did it on purpose. And they made a calculation that even if they got caught, which they did, they could unload that steel and drive everybody out of business anyway, which is exactly what happened. And at least in Western Pennsylvania, well, frankly, in Northeastern Pennsylvania and Northeastern Ohio, people still remember what the Japanese did.
Yeah.
100%. And, these are two very big, important swing states, still highly populous. I don't think you can really underestimate that level of resentment, where it's just like, you did this to us, and if we ever get a chance to get even with you, we will. And here we are.
Yeah. I will say also, just in Biden administration last minute moves news, did you see the DOJ is suing 6 of the country's largest landlords, accusing them of colluding to raise rents across the country? I like this. I mean, I do wish it had taken. I remember in the past sort of mocking. I forget what it was. It was like a Giant Times in-depth like feature piece about Lena Khan. I remember saying, like, Lena Khan's superpowers breaking up is antitrust, and we were like, she hasn't. I like Lena Khan, right? I'd like to see her stay in government. I don't know if that's going to happen, but nothing actually had happened. It was about a lot of stuff that was in the works, and so it's nice to see some of this kind of stuff begin to happen. I don't know, I don't know how well this lawsuit is going to fare under Donald Trump. Although, it'll probably have, if people hear about it, it'll probably be popular enough that there will be some pressure not to touch it. But interesting. It's interesting to watch the last moves of an administration,
Yeah, I don't understand why they behave like a college student the night before the first day of finals, where they kick everything down into the transition period, stuff that they could have done much earlier, especially stuff that would have been popular and probably would have helped them during a campaign. It's very strange.
It is. It's like, are you that scared of pushback from real page or whatever? Like pushback from these, like that's the like company that makes the algorithm that they're accused of using, or the algorithm they're accused of using to collude on prices. It's weird. It's like, it's sort of, I mean, maybe there's another explanation for it, but the most obvious one to me is just like, yeah, just fear of any consequences whatsoever from doing anything, you know?
Yeah, who's on the side of the landlords? Nobody.
I mean, no. Well, the landlords. Speaking of housing prices, one of the things that we've been watching these fires all over the LA area, which are it's just awful to watch, like these embers swirling like a blizzard because they're getting these Santa Ana winds that are blowing them everywhere. But, you know, it's sort of harrowing to watch videos of a natural disaster. I don't necessarily, you know, I don't think that we have a lot to say, you know, like, oh golly, there's a fire, isn't that bad? It's not necessarily a very interesting reporting or conversation. But what is really troubling to me is what's going to happen afterward. Because as we talked about not too long ago, Ted, there is actually a home insurance crisis in this country right now. A whole bunch of houses in some of these neighborhoods that have burned to the ground lost their homeowners insurance, some of them just months before this fire. And I was looking into this a little bit, and I know we were hoping to talk to someone in a little bit more depth about this down the line. But one of the issues in California is that, like, a bunch of insurers, California, I guess, has very, relatively speaking, sort of consumer-friendly regulations when it comes to homeowners insurance. And one of the issues has been that insurers were not allowed to raise rates as much as they wanted to. And so they pulled out because they were like, if we can't raise rates this much, then we can't shell out if we need to. Now, listen, I don't tend to have sympathy with insurance companies, you know? They would say this, like they wanted to raise these rates. My knee-jerk sympathy, I would say, is not with them. But it is also true that we have you know, that real estate prices are incredible right now. Like they have been really high. We had the burst of a bubble in 2008, right? But the real estate prices, like home prices, have just continued to go up. And so to some degree, I think there probably is a little bit of truth in what these companies are saying. Like if your house is worth $3 million and it burns down, we got to pay you $3 million and you're going to need to pay us more. And it's like there's this cycle of growth, right? Like everything in this cycle of expense is shooting upward, except for people's wages, right? Except for people's incomes. And that's sort of the breaking point where it all kind of falls apart. Because if we were all making enough money to pay for these rates, I mean, you know, of course you're on a trip to like astronomical prices for things eventually, but at least like everyone can participate in the system the same way. But it can't do that if, you know, if the state is trying to protect people from overpaying for insurance, but actually because of our the crazy inflation of real estate prices, like that is what insurers are going to have to pay out. Like, yeah, this is it's a problem that's a little bit more difficult than greedy insurance companies, I think.
Oh, I think, look, you're looking at California's ground zero for this problem. And it's what you said, Michelle. I mean, it's a place, first of all, that has some of the most expensive real estate in the entire United States. Actually includes some municipalities like the San Jose metro area that do have the absolute highest real estate prices in the country. On top of that, you have elevated risks in California, wildfires, earthquakes, mudslides. Wildfires set the stage for future mudslides. I mean, you know, it's going to be endless. I mean, it's kind of a, you know, I always think it's strange that people think of California as paradise. It's a bit of a hellscape too, you know, and so maybe it's both. But you know, people like living on the edge. But yeah, I mean, you know, like you, I'm more on Team Luigi than on Team Big Health, Big Insurance. But they're right. They can't, their business is not going to be sustainable if they have to, if they can't raise the rates proportionately, and they can't. And so they're, they just can't get, even if it was like they could get the regulators to sign off on the higher rates, they're not going to be able to get people to pay them. Old people, for example, who are on a fixed income. So this is a climate change issue. And I mean, I hate to say it, if we had a planned economy, we'd probably say, you know what, the population of California has to drop by half. We have to relocate these people. Basically, like, this is a Chernobyl zone. These people can't live here. There's no water for them, right? We have the Colorado water, problem that's been going on for years. It's getting worse and worse. I mean, climate change is spinning out of control rapidly, and it's a doom loop. And, I don't think people are still focused on it.
But I also feel like, I think climate change is exacerbating phenomena that already existed and have existed for a long time. And so some of the problem is now, like, there have always been fires, right? There have always been fires.
But not at this time of year. The Santa Ana winds are not now.
I do think there is also a sort of political and economic problem that shouldn't be ignored, because you can also point to climate change and say these fires are coming at the wrong time. Because there have always been the Santa Ana winds. There have always been devastating fires. There have always been hurricanes. But we weren't always in this, we weren't always in the same economic position, right? Mm-hmm. And they didn't necessarily always, we had systems that were supposed to function to make people whole after these events. And I do feel like as long as that system continues to break down, like, you can't outrun a disaster, right? Even if you move everybody from California inland, there's still going to be a flood or an earthquake or whatever. Like, there's still
people to Nevada, where all the data farms are. I know there's no water, but like, the reason that all the data farms are there is because there are no tornadoes, there are no hurricanes, there are no earthquakes.
It's just dry as hell.
It's just dry as hell.
I mean, you'd also probably have more water in California if it hadn't been purchased by almond farms decades ago and drawn away from population centers. So, like, again, I mean, I'm not saying ignore the climate change angle, but, like, there are so many human decisions that have been made in the relatively recent past and up to the present that are contributing to this misery, and that are going to contribute to exacerbating inequality after these fires are over. Because Meghan Markle and James Woods and whatever, if their houses burn down, they're going to be fine. But, like, the regular people with no homeowners insurance, I don't know what the state of California, they're screwed. They're screwed permanently. Their kids are probably screwed. And it just, it just broadens the divide here.
Well, as a society,
and those are things that we can do something about right now.
Well, I don't know that we can. I mean, this is late stage monopoly capitalism, right? I mean, so the state has decided, among other things, to emphasize the rights of consumers over the rights of producers to be paid better. So in other words, it's like, okay, so we're going to export jobs, but you'll be able to buy everything for less. Never mind that you won't make as much money as you would. We've decided to deprioritize interest on savings and to disincentivize savings. So therefore, we don't save as much money, so that we're not prepared as much for a catastrophe. We've decided to pump up the real estate market by providing all sorts of tax incentives for developers, for people, for homeowners to get. It's the only way for an upper middle class American to really build wealth, is to buy a house or a co-op. There's no other way. I mean, the stock market, forget it. So, I mean, the system has decided to make, Michelle, you're right, all these decisions. But when you say, well, we could change it, I think a system assumes a life of its own at a certain, and especially when it's been going on for a while. It's like, not like we just had a revolution 4 years ago and we still have flexibility to change how our priorities. The system is what it is, and it's going to continue to get worse. The income inequality, there is no fixing it. You can't reform it. It's too far gone, I think.
I guess I feel like there's more hope of that in our lifetimes Which is not to say that there's no hope of doing anything to mitigate climate change, that it's like not possible, right? Rather how difficult it will be, whether anyone's going to do it, whatever. But it does seem like there is at least more hope. You know, like countries do change their systems of government sometimes, and it's, you know, it's difficult to live through and often involves violence, but it does happen. And I feel like that's something that's maybe more achievable than dumping a bunch of ice in the ocean and trying to cool it off. You know what I mean? But those changes would also help mitigate climate change. You know what I mean? Like they'll or help us address it and, you know, do what we can to live with it and not continue to contribute to it. That's what I mean. Like, I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, one of my pet peeves for some reason is trawling in the Bering Sea and the Bering Strait. And they're like, oh, well, these fish stocks have collapsed because of climate change. No, they haven't. They've collapsed because you're allowing trawlers to dredge up and kill and waste millions of fish. And so it's like, you could stop doing that. And climate change would continue, but people's lives would be improved in the moment, right? That's all.
Well, you can see that. I mean, I remember, you know, John had a little, you know, Ohio memory. I'll share one of mine from the 80s. You know, Ohio, I don't remember if it was the late 70s or the early 80s, but Lake Erie was declared biologically dead.
Dead.
EPA.
Dead.
In other words, like not even protozoa or bacteria could sustain themselves in this giant body of water, right?
That's disgusting.
And then due to a variety of factors and deindustrialization being paramount, all the factories that were dumping crap into Lake Erie went out of business and closed, right? And so at some point, you know, people stopped paying attention. And like by the late 80s, early 90s, people were like, I just caught a big old fish in Lake Erie. And it was like, what? And I ate it and I didn't die. And, you know, and so nature came back, right? I mean, it is possible to turn things around. And
this is the original, the earth is healing meme.
Yes. I mean, I think the earth self-heals very quickly, really. It just has to be left alone. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at what happened during the pandemic, right? When there were all those stories. I mean, it happened here in New York City where there were all sorts of amazing birds, you know, in our public parks that we'd never seen before. And then suddenly now they're gone again. Now we're back to just pigeons and crows. But, you know, animal life was more bold. It was like venturing into the suburbs. You know, nature wants to come back.
Ted, there was a story on WFMJ.com today. This is one of the Youngstown, Ohio TV stations. And they said that somebody in one of the city parks took a picture of a lazuli bunting. It's a little bird about that big, and it looks like an eastern bluebird, but it's slightly less blue. And they're telling people, run to the park to see this lazuli bunting because it has never been recorded in
Leave
Ohio
it alone.
before.
Don't run to the park.
Leave it alone. Number one, leave it alone. Number two, this is because of climate change. Mm-hmm. This is not a good thing. Right. That a bird that's native to Northern California and Oregon somehow ends up in Ohio. This is not a good thing.
No. And some of it's very counterintuitive and strange. Like, for example, I was living in the Hamptons until 4 years ago, and snowy owls started appearing.
Oh, my God.
And now the thing is, you might be like, but climate change means our climate's been getting warmer, and it has in Long Island, and snowy owls are from Canada. And so it's like, what are these guys doing here? Well, I did some research, and it turns out that the grubs and other food that they ate were dying due to climate change and fires and all these things. So they were forced south in search of food. So everything's getting stirred up and messed up.
Mm-hmm. I saw a snowy owl once, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I took a picture of it.
They're amazing.
And then I looked it up, and they shouldn't be in Pennsylvania.
No, but they are. They're all over.
They are.
When I started telling friends that they were there, they thought I was lying. I had
no, they're there.
They're all over. Yeah.
Yep.
Was that the owl that is the center of the famous staircase death or murder? Was it a snowy owl? You know this one?
No.
No.
Oh, all right. Well, this is a rabbit hole for I don't know how much you like true crime, Ted, but I know
I
John does.
love
I
it.
can't believe you don't know the
Love it.
staircase. A woman falls down the stairs and dies at the bottom of the stairs. It's like a huge bloody scene. Um, her husband is blamed. Then there comes to be all this weird stuff from his past. He's like he's having affairs. Another friend of his died at the foot of a staircase in Germany like 15 years before, blah, blah, blah. But he maintains that an owl got into the house, latched onto her at the top of the staircase, and she fell and died at the bottom. And there was like a single owl feather found at the scene. And so it's like there
Wow.
are, they had kids. I think she had kids that they'd been married for some time. And so they were very close with him as well. And people in the family took sides and like, oh yeah, there was also like, I think it was one of the cases where blood spatter evidence was used to convict him. But then, as that was discredited, then it was revisited.
Was this in North Carolina?
Yes.
Yes, I remember this.
Yeah. But I don't know. It might've been a snowy owl. It was a big owl.
Snowy owls they can be really quite big. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, take out a human. I just like you guys both to know that I also lived in Ohio for a couple of years.
Where?
I did not know that.
I lived in Columbus for a couple of years when I was a little girl.
Excellent. We have the whole state covered between the three of us.
Yeah.
We do, yeah.
Yeah.
Columbus was nice. It was a nice place to be a kid. I lived right by a big quarry. And,
Two of my kids are in Cincinnati now.
And by the Scioto River. So you could just go
Cincinnati's
down
the
and
best
play in
city
the
in
river.
the state, I think.
Yeah, I
Really?
agree.
Huh.
I prefer Cincinnati to Columbus.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cincinnati,
Even though Columbus is bigger.
Cincinnati has a honky tonk thing going for it. And it's the border with Kentucky is like an interesting influence. And also topographically, it's really cool. It's got a lot of hills and valleys and stuff. Columbus is just boring kind of the way it looks.
It's nice if you're a kid. It's cute if you're a kid.
Well, yeah.
All right. Do we want to get into some of these media stories?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, we have the Post cartoonist who quit when a cartoon of hers that was very critical of Jeff Bezos wasn't killed, but it was, they declined to publish it. We also have CNN being sued for defamation in Florida over a story about exploiting Afghans who were trying to escape Afghanistan. And then we have the very Hollywood back and forth between Blake Lively and James Baldoni, who were co-stars on the set of It Ends With Us, who are accusing each other of, sexual harassment or creating a hostile working environment, but then also just of going too far with their publicists' teams and trying to wreck the other's reputations. I don't know where you want to start, Ted.
Well, as the resident cartoonist, maybe I'll do Ann Telnaes. So, Ann Telnaes is the one of only two women, I believe, in the United States to have ever won the Pulitzer Prize in editorial cartooning. She's worked at the Post since 2008. And I know her very well, and I've known her for a long time. And to my knowledge, she was always happy at the Post, no drama or anything of that nature. She's known really for, she does both static cartoons and also these sort of quick animations, like 30-second, very simple animations. So she submitted a rough sketch. Some clients request that you do that. And so she submitted a rough sketch. It depicted Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, Dr. Pat Soon-Shiong, who is the owner of the LA Times, who, like Bezos at the same time, right before the election, put the kibosh on the editorial board's desire to endorse Kamala Harris in the presidential election. And also the Mickey Mouse, symbolizing the Disney Corporation, and Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, basically kowtowing to a statue of Donald Trump and offering giant bags of cash to him. And so obviously this was about Zuckerberg trying to curry favor with Trump and also Bezos and Dr. Soon-Shiong and Disney. I think we all know what the stories are based on. David Shipley, who I also know not very well, but I know because he used to be at the New York Times, he defended himself and said, look, I didn't turn down Ann's cartoon because, and it's important to point out that she resigned on principle. She wasn't fired. And he didn't want her to quit. He urged her to reconsider, but he said that there had already been two op-eds, one satirical, presumably by Alexandra Petri, and who's the resident satirist there, and one by someone else where they'd already covered this. So he thought it's too redundant. I don't want to do it again. I don't know how much. And so that's basically the controversy. She said that she had never had a cartoon, I think, turned down before based on a rough sketch, or at least based on the topic. And many of us in cartooning we've had a lot of discussions about it. I mean, on the one hand, I think I've said this before to you guys, I kind of think, if you buy a newspaper, you probably not unreasonably feel like you shouldn't be insulted in the pages of your own newspaper. On the other hand, if you own a newspaper, you probably shouldn't have any editorial input whatsoever into your newspaper. Both of those things are true. And but there was also, like, the whole point of submitting a rough sketch is that you're giving your editor the chance to turn it down. On the other hand, if your cartoonist has been there for 15 years or more and doing a good job, and you like her, why would you not let her have this? Also, cartooning is not the same medium as writing, so it's not, the redundancy argument doesn't really work as well. And also, this is a paper that ran 15 obituaries about Fred Hyatt, who editorial page editor of the Washington Post, who was beloved by them, but who died of a heart attack a few years back. 15 obituaries. Redundancy is not a problem for these people.
Yeah.
So,
Ted, may I ask you a question? Is it unusual? Well, let me rephrase. Glenn Greenwald famously quit the Intercept, saying that he was being censored. The other side of the story was that no, he was being edited. And he was undergoing the same editing process that everybody else at the Intercept was going through. Is that what we're seeing here, or do you think this was censorship?
Well, editing is a form of censorship, right? I mean, by definition.
Yeah, it can be, definitely.
So the issue, so the thing is, I think it's always important to clarify, censorship isn't always bad. If I owned a newspaper and someone came out in favor of pedophilia in my newspaper, I would censor that. And I would be wrong not to censor that. So censorship is not, but I think what we really mean here by censorship is shorthand for content that really ought to run and is being suppressed for political or otherwise nefarious reasons. I don't know what happened with Greenwald at all, but with here, I think it's not clear cut. Anne obviously took umbrage at what David Shipley did. I think it probably, if I have to, speculate, which is what we're here for, is I would say that she probably thought, okay, I'm taking a chance here. I'm going to criticize the boss. And she probably anticipated pushback. And when she got it, it kind of played into her narrative. But on the other hand, you can't be surprised that there's going to be pushback when you go after the owner of the paper. Right. So obviously it's, it's kind of like, it wouldn't even occur to me if I worked at the Washington Post to do an anti-Bezos cartoon, because I would be like, this is the Washington Post. They're not going to run it. I can really argue this either way. It's not one of those like clearly she's right or clearly they're right. I think obviously it bothered her. And for her, it was important. I suspect that coming on the heels, I know she was very upset about the non-endorsement of Harris. And when that happened, by the way, a lot of writers speaking of redundancy, I think like 7 or 8, and on the editorial page, all wrote critical op-eds against Bezos, saying that the paper ought not to have done that. Her cartoon was basically just a take on the democracy dies in darkness motto of the paper, where she just painted her cartoon black, all black, just ran it as a black square. So she has, like we can sort of, I think this has probably been one of those, like a long time coming, like she chafed under the yoke of Bezos. And then finally this was like one thing too much.
Yeah. 'Cause I might say, try it again. You know what I mean? If it's the first time a cartoon has been declined, maybe give it one more. Unless you just, yeah, I think I agree with you on that, Ted. Because the other thing is, I mean, I agree, like, it's a different medium than op-eds or whatever. But I do understand, I think, the point of view of editors who are looking at trust in media and confidence in legacy media and thinking, we did like 8 solid years of Trump criticism, Trump's a Russian agent, Trump's actually Hitler for real, whatever, all of this stuff. And what's the response been? So maybe we need to pause on that and be a little more judicious about it, right? But this is not necessarily critical of Trump. This is critical of these news agencies who are so I don't know, but I can understand that because I got tired of it as well. I got tired of every single fucking story in the news being about how does Donald Trump's mind work? You know what I mean? Like this about his childhood trauma, this like weird, pointless psychoanalysis. Like I got really sick of that shit too.
That's what it became. I mean, when Trump became, and I'm really, every now and then you look back at some work where you're like, I can't do this about all of it or even most of it. But then sometimes I'll look back at something and I'll be like, I really saw this one coming. So in the transition period before the first Trump administration, in early 2017, right before he took office, I wrote a piece saying, like, for people who want to know what living under Trump is going to be like, I'll tell you. And I talked about Turkmenistan and the dictator Sapir Mirat Niyazov, who, aka Turkmenbashi of Turkmenistan, the most notorious, I think, the most insane dictator on the planet at the time.
The giant revolving statue.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes, that turned to
He's
face
the Kim
sun.
Jong-un of Central Asia.
Yeah, except not as shy and retiring. Right. And he renamed the months of the year after himself
no
and
nuclear
his
program, I'll say, sorry.
And he tried to put a giant lake in the middle of the desert in the world's hottest country. He was completely insane. He personally reviewed all applications to college. Anyway, wow. I could go on. He was a maniac. But anyway, people in Turkmenistan, and I spent quite a bit of time there, were obsessed with him. His every move. I mean, what will he do next? What new edict will he pass? Like there was a no smoking edict because he decided like smoking's bad. Like beard growth is like limited to a certain amount. Like no music at a certain point. It's like what will happen? And it was all Turkmenbashi all the time. And I was like, this is what it's going to be like under Trump. People are going to obsess over him. And because he's got that kind of personality, and when you have that kind of figure as the president, it's just nature. And that's what happened. And we're about to hang on tight. Here we go again.
Yeah. I think they're not going to do that this time. I will give also that cartoonist credit. She foresaw. This was before Zuckerberg's big announcement about how they're getting rid of fact checking on Facebook and going to a community notes model too, which is also a very funny little video that he put out. We're going back to our roots. Just weird, like weirdly implying that, I don't know. There is a lot that was strange.
We tried censorship. Now we're
and I guess you guys don't like it, so we're back to free speech on Facebook. Woo.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to be clear here. Obviously, as a cartoonist, I have solidarity with Ann Telnaes, and obviously, and that said, I do see how this could be construed as. I mean, I will also say that like it's unusual to work for any client and work 14 years and not have a rough sketch turned down. I mean, that's a long time. I mean, I've been with the same syndicate since 1996, and they've outright killed cartoons that were already drawn maybe 3 times. I consider that to be like basically zero censorship. I consider that to be like no problem. I mean, that's great. Like if they had killed 20 of them. I mean, Rob Rogers at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette cartoonist, the paper was bought by a pro-Trump dude, and he had I think 24 cartoons in a row all killed. I mean, because they were anti-Trump. Now that's a different thing.
Yeah. Maybe, who knows, maybe the second one would also have been declined, and then she whatever. Quit if you want to, right? Go somewhere else.
Yeah, well, There's no place else to go.
Well, I don't know. She's been
Editorial
working there for
cartooning?
14
Are you
years.
kidding?
Maybe-
There's no
yeah.
jobs. It's over. This is a
Yeah.
completely dead profession. I mean, there's
that's-
fewer. I think there's 8 of us left. I mean,
God.
it's done.
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
I'm young. I'm 61. There's
But you
nothing
are.
else, and there's nobody else. That's the thing. Here's the thing. Like, if it's so dead that if newspapers all decided to run ads in Indeed saying, we want to pay $100,000 for a cartoonist, come and work for us, there'd be no one to take the jobs, because there's no young people in their 40s, 30s, 20s who are coming up and have gone into it because they saw what happened to us.
What's the great British magazine, Private Eye?
Oh yeah.
It's the
It's
American
fantastic.
Private Eye. I remember when I was a kid, there were like cartoon magazines, and
Yeah,
I'd get all
Mad.
the time.
I
They're
worked
so
for
cool.
Mad.
Yeah, I mean not Mad,
Cracked.
but other ones. Yeah.
National Lampoon,
Yeah.
Playboy had lots of cartoons.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like,
it's print.
and what's
is the
really
issue.
weird is that like readers love cartoons.
Yeah.
If they run them on if they were to run them on, say, foxnews.com or msnbc.com, they'd get lots of clicks. They'd be one of the most popular feature there. So it's not that there's no demand. It's just that gatekeepers don't want them.
Mhm.
Sad. All right, should we get to CNN and the New York Times? Which one's got you more head up, Ted?
You choose.
I don't know. I tried to look into the CNN one, and I was frustrated because I couldn't find the original report anywhere. So it's about a report by Alex Marquardt. It's from 2021, I believe, and it is about, the travails of Afghans trying to flee the country, and they highlight this guy Zachary Young, who was a ex-military. Then he he had some kind of contracting company, and he was offering to get people out of Afghanistan for a handsome fee. And he's alleging in court that CNN defamed him by suggesting that he was engaging in black market activity. Like they had his picture up above a chyron that says like desperate Afghans go to the black market, whatever, to get out. I don't know. I find it hard. I had to look around and I couldn't find the original report anywhere. I mean, of course, because this is a lawsuit and because there's the process of discovery, there have been internal texts and emails uncovered that have, I think Marquardt or producers writing back and forth about how they're gonna nail this guy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like they clearly didn't like him.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sort of curious I'm curious whether you think this was I don't know how clear cut this one actually is.
Well, okay, so it ought to be clear cut, but it's not. Libel is very difficult to sue for in the United States, as we've talked about before, and I'm sure we'll talk about again. I'm very sympathetic to this guy, Marquardt. It sounds like the paper. It sounds like CNN really had an agenda here. They really
Young or Marquardt's the reporter.
Sorry,
Young is the guy. Yeah,
Young. Yeah. So yeah, they were after him. They decided to nail him. They gave him like a couple of hours to comment, and then they didn't give him enough time to get back. They were in a hurry to do it. It didn't seem like it was really like it wasn't the kind of story that couldn't have waited a day or two. Like it wasn't like wildfires moving rapidly or anything. And it doesn't sound like they really had the goods. Now, the standard for I don't know if he would be considered, I guess, a limited public figure under libel law, because he's not famous, but he was the subject of an issue of public interest, is what the courts would say. And under the case of New York Times versus Sullivan, 1964, the standard is for defamation is that you either have to publish something or broadcast something that you knowingly know was false and damaging, or, and this is the important part here when it comes to Marquardt and Young, did you have reckless disregard for the truth? And unfortunately, I know way too much about this from my own experiences, but suffice it to say that the courts really never pay attention to the reckless disregard for the truth part of New York Times versus Sullivan.
Mhm.
They just don't. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, what is reckless disregard for the truth? I think anyone who's worked in journalism or near journalism knows what it is. It's like, if your mom says she loves you, check it out. You double check, triple check, make sure it's right. And when a journalistic organization doesn't do that, it seems like they've engaged in a dictionary definition of reckless disregard for the truth.
Mhm.
It's like, so the thing is, what these entities use laws like the anti-SLAPP statute in many states, but basically they rely on the defense. The First Amendment gives us broad latitude. We're allowed to make mistakes, honest mistakes. We're allowed to exaggerate. We don't have to say everything that we learn. We're allowed to have a point of view. All true, but reckless disregard for the truth has completely fallen on the floor like an old cigarette butt or a beer can. I mean, and I think this is a classic example of this is where it's at. This is a reckless disregard for the truth issue. And it's not clear cut. I think he's probably going to lose, just because it's not to say that he's right, that he's not been wronged. It sounds like he's been wronged. It sounds like the paper, CNN, I keep saying the paper. Yeah. CNN did not have him down dead to rights. And I think they shouldn't have published something like this unless they had him dead to rights. If I were a producer, I would have been like, I'm not sure about this.
And there were producers who were saying, there's too many holes here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's also having a hard time proving that it did him any actual damage.
Well, you don't need to prove that. That you don't need to prove. You just need, if you're suing for defamation or libel per se, all you have to do is prove that it's inherently damaging. So, classic example would be if I am accused. If someone publishes and says Ted Rall never washes his hands after he goes to the bathroom, I can't really prove that hurt me. But if I'm a butcher, yes, that's going to hurt. That's going to harm me, right? Mm-hmm. And so in this case, if this guy gets a reputation of being, someone who basically is a fixer for money, but he wasn't, that's going to, that's going to make people not want to donate money.
I think the thing is also he was a fixer for money, right? He was like offering to get people out who could pay. And the issue is they're suggesting that he was doing something illegal, mm-hmm. or he was trying to overcharge individuals. And he was like, this is just the service that I'm providing, and this is what it costs. Like, I'm not a philanthropist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think what he's kind of, I think the argument is tough, right? Because he's going to have to explain like why he was doing what he was doing, and kind of like, well, what's the difference between taking money from Afghans who are trying to escape as opposed to taking money on behalf of Afghans who are trying to escape? Yeah. And I think it's too hard to explain to the typical person who just, I think the typical judge isn't going to get it. And there's just not much sympathy for people who, I think he got a little bit screwed here. I don't know. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think so too. Mm-hmm. I think so too. And, it's a little bit troubling to me too, that this is not really a mainstream conversation that's taking place. It's sort of relegated only to the people who follow these issues. And I think it should be a mainstream conversation.
Mm-hmm. And is probably more important when we are talking about people who aren't major public figures.
That's right.
You know what I mean? I am of course inclined to be on the side of papers and protecting themselves and being able to talk about powerful figures and occasionally make a mistake or have a point of view or exaggerate. But when you're talking about someone whose life really can be terribly harmed, mm-hmm. Permanently harmed, I have more care for them, right?
I used to feel that way until I became a public figure.
No regard for you, Ted. Do we care about? I think the Blake Lively, James Baldoni thing is really interesting. I happened to learn. I watched an interview with James Baldoni's lawyer with Chris Cuomo on News Nation.
Right.
Oh,
he's also Chris Cuomo's lawyer, it turns out.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. But basically, they did this movie together. I guess I'll recap it, right? They did this movie together, It ended up being a success, but there was.
It ends with us.
Yes, it ends with us. It's a movie about domestic violence. That really matters. But there was some gossip column drama around the time the movie premiered, which was in August, that the two co-stars were not pictured together. And then it was like, oh my God, Blake Lively's husband, Ryan Reynolds, has blocked her co-star on Instagram, which is such a strange piece of information to know. And so there was all this gossip, and there was a bunch of negative press about Blake Lively at the time. Some awkward interview of hers from years before resurfaced, where she made fun of the journalist who was interviewing her. She was criticized for like doing a sort of like giggly fashion focused promotional conversation for the film when it was about domestic violence, and people were like, how dare you talk about clothes and have a nice time when you're promoting a movie that has this serious theme, which I think is a pretty silly criticism actually. But yeah, so Blake Lively all of a sudden is being dragged through the coals, and people are coming out and saying like, yeah, she sucks, she's always sucks, we don't like her, whatever. Blake Lively then right at the end, right before Christmas, files a complaint in California, alleging it's not at this point so much that about whatever happened on the set. This is a sort of like a publicist versus publicist issue, right? They were accusing of Baldoni's team of planting these stories about her to try and wreck her reputation because they were afraid of her coming out and making these accusations about him. So her team tells the New York Times about this, right? As I understand it, before they file the complaint. And New York Times reporter Megan Twohey writes a big story about it, which Baldoni's team then responds to by filing a lawsuit. So before Lively actually did, suing the Times for $250 million for defamation by saying that they got all this information from Blake Lively's team, they cherry-picked it to make my client look bad, and they may have a point there. I think from what I've heard, they present some text exchanges without context, which is not to say that maybe he wasn't a creep on the set.
Right.
But it's interesting to me because I kind of feel like, I mean, basically, defamation is what, not to get us sued or whatever, but it sort of seems like that's like part of a publicist's job. You know what I mean? Like all of these Page Six stories, the Hollywood Reporter, People, whatever, that's all just stuff that is coming from people's publicists. And it's either stuff to make them look good or stuff to make people who they are getting divorced from or didn't like working with or whatever look bad. I mean, remember all the stories about how Paz de la Huerta is a crazy bitch, and so's Rose McGowan, and so's anybody who didn't fuck Harvey Weinstein or fuck him enough or whatever. Like, that's basic, like that's sort of the name of the game. And what it seems like to me is maybe this all would have been okay and no big deal if you didn't get the New York Times involved. And that's where the line was crossed, because that's a big deal. That's like big deal real world media, not celebrity focused media. I don't know. Maybe this is sort of half baked, but it's interesting to me because this stuff's been going on for months. Blake Lively was, fat shamed a reporter, and James Baldoni, it's happening in these small scale things, and nobody's bothering to put any money up or get very upset about it. But then you get into this paper, and I do think again, it seems like they did cherry pick information, and they could have done a different story and maybe not had to face this accusation. I don't know. The fact that Baldoni's team has filed a lawsuit, would seem to indicate that they're perfectly happy having all of their communications become public. Unless it doesn't seem like they're hoping for a settlement. These are two pretty wealthy people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many things to unpack, right? I mean, to me, I think the New York Times is where the story's at. That lawsuit against the Times, that could go somewhere. This is goes a little bit beyond reckless disregard for the truth. It might be that they knowingly published. It seems like there's some things they published that they knew might not, or probably were not true. For example, there's this feeding imbroglio about whether or not Mr. Baldoni was invited to her. She characterized it. The Times characterized it as he basically burst in while she was breastfeeding in her trailer. And then he was able to produce text messages that showed that she said, "Oh, well, pop on by. I'll just be pumping." And apparently the Times should have had that access to that. Seems they probably did. If they did, that's a smoking gun. That's a problem for the Times. I think that's the issue. I don't think, like, as you allude, Michelle, I don't think that these, publicists, there's no law against publicists digging up old shit against you and bringing it up into the public light. Maybe there ought to be, I don't know, but there isn't. So I don't know, how it's actionable in any way. I think those cases are going to disappear. But the Times, I think, if I were them, I'd be a little worried.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say again, just because one time, this is one of the main points of contention that Baldoni's team points out, is that the Times, said that he just walked in on her, but they have an exchange where at least one time she said, "Come on in, I'm just pumping." It doesn't mean that he didn't walk in on her at other times, but
true.
It does mean that this is not proof of it. And if you're the Times and you've read that whole conversation, you should know that, right? So it just means you're running a more complicated story. And it also, I think, they included excerpts of a conversation between publicists congratulating themselves on a story that portrayed Blake Lively really negatively, but neither of them had actually contributed to or written that story. It's like a joking exchange about something that's sort of serendipitous to them. Which again, yeah, it just seems like it just seems like they decided that they were out to get this guy. Maybe he deserves it, but you didn't. Your story doesn't prove that, right? But I said James Baldoni. I don't know. I feel like they're probably both. They're probably both bad actors.
It reminds me when I read about that, I remember thinking, it's like the OJ case, right? Where Detective Furman probably found one of the two missing gloves that OJ left at the scene, and then decided to chuck it over the wall at OJ's house and say, "Hey, look, there's some just probable cause for searching the premises," right? And it's like, so he decided to give Lady Justice a little kick in the ass. I mean, OJ did it, but
you can't do that. Yeah,
exactly. You might have the right target, but you got to do it the right way.
Yeah. And this clearly was about, there was a fight over editorial control of the film, right? And who was going to get the final cut. I do find it sort of perplexing on one hand that Blake Lively, who is, I would say, by far the more powerful character here. If the things that were going on set were going on, I just find it surprising that you don't need this money. You know what I mean? You don't need this money. This isn't your. I'm a little bit surprised, but I'm not going to say I don't think it's possible or I think that she's lying necessarily. I find that kind of surprising. I will also say James Baldoni seems to be one of these real gender warriors, which I think should always raise your hackles. You know what I mean? If some dude is telling you, I remember seeing dating profiles, and there was one that was like, my favorite comedians are Ali Wong and Amy Schumer and somebody else. And can men even be funny? And I founded my college's reproductive rights center, whatever. And I think those are all red flags. Like if you're too powerfully a gender warrior, if you're like too 24/7 committed to equality and elevating women, I think that raises some flags.
A white
for me.
knight.
Yeah, you're probably a creep.
Yeah, and that's usually what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he seems to have been one of these guys. So I find very plausible.
To defend her, I can imagine, Blake Lively thinking, I don't want to get the reputation of someone who walked off set or quit a production. That would not help your reputation, even if it was not a big production.
I guess.
A big deal movie.
I guess. I mean, you're like 37 years old. You got 4 kids. You're married to Ryan Reynolds. You've got your own like beauty line. You're worth, I don't know what they're worth, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but she's
Yeah.
And this
37.
is
She
not
wants to keep
great
working for a
art.
while.
Huh?
She's 37. She probably wants to work for many years to
Oh
come.
yeah, yeah, maybe. And I don't know. It does feel like you could buy your way onto any project you want. It's, I'm not saying I'm not saying that I don't believe her. I have no idea what happened on the set.
And I don't know
It's just,
this could be a personality clash, right? We don't know.
yeah. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that I'm surprised at that. I would think if someone is being that, if someone is like ogling you repeatedly, walking into your trailer while you're trying to change, making comments about your body, trying to insert gratuitous sex scenes, like this is all, it just all seems, it seems intolerable. And there are people who stay in intolerable positions because they have to, because they don't have any other choice. They don't have they don't have the means to extricate themselves from the situation. I mean, whatever, who knows? Maybe she doesn't want to throw everybody out of a job, and yeah, I get it. There are reasons, but I just think, wow, that sounds terrible. I wouldn't keep working with this guy. I wouldn't make him sign a letter that says, don't like stare at my crotch when I'm doing a fake birthing scene. You know what I mean? Like, it was gross.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. I mean, she certainly, the other thing, the other aspect of this that is interesting is, just when you thought it was safe to go back into the Me Too water, right? Me Too really looked like it was dead and gone.
Yeah.
And then, no, it's not. This is a Me Too case.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely it is. I mean, and we'll see, it'll be interesting to see this lawsuit play out and see what ends up being proven. Like I said, I find it totally plausible that this guy was absolutely a dick on set.
I do too. I also think it's entirely possible that she's oversensitive. I think, or maybe both things are true.
Or like, he was a dick on set, she was perfectly reasonable, but the New York Times hasn't done anybody any favors with this one necessarily, if they really have cherry picked things, which it does look like.
It's such sloppy reporting. I mean, that's a common thread here,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, reporting is just not what it used to be. I mean, it's like, nowadays, if you're the subject of a controversy, the odds are no one from a media organization will actually call you or text you or passenger pigeon you for comment. You won't hear from them. You'll just suddenly wake up and suddenly you're getting Google hits. And you're like, what?
Yeah. Well, that was one of the criticisms here, or the complaints too, where Baldoni's team says you emailed us for comment on a Friday at 9:45. 3 days before Christmas, when everything was shut down, and you gave us 14 hours for on the record comment. That wasn't enough time for us to be able to respond. And I don't know.
They're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
My editors would not have put up with that when I was young.
Good on you. And good on them. All right. Is that about it, folks?
That's about it.
All right.
Okay.
We got more to get into in the very near future, which I'm looking forward to. But that's, I guess, our deprogramming for the day done. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Hey, do we want to just do like a lead in to that recording for tomorrow, or like how we're gonna patch it in?
Well, I think maybe we can just, if we're all going to be there, I'll just start it as this is deprogram, and we'll just talk about one topic.
Okay, that's fine. Cool.
And then